Jack's garden hose lay severed, water spilling uselessly onto cracked earth, his sanctuary betrayed in a cruel instant. Fury burned in his chest as teenage laughter echoed behind the fence, mocking his pain and hard-won peace. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jack Reynolds knelt by the shattered hose, the once steady stream of water now nothing more than a useless limp fragment, lying in the grass. His hands, scarred and calloused from years wielding weapons in faraway deserts and jungles, trembled not from weakness, but from the surge of emotions roiling inside him. This garden, these roses, were more than plants. They were a symbol of everything he had survived, a quiet testament that life could still flourish after the storms of combat. Every morning spent tending to this patch was therapy, a ritual that grounded him, gave him purpose beyond the uniform that he had long since shed. But now, in a single, cruel moment, that sanctuary had been violated. The cut hose lay like a betrayal beneath the glaring sun, the scent of fresh earth and blooming petals mocking the sense of peace that had been so carefully cultivated. Jack's mind raced back over the last decade since his discharge, how he'd wrestled with the silence of civilian life, the numbness that sometimes settled like a fog around his heart. His garden was his anchor, the one place where he still felt a connection to something pure and lasting. Tyler Brooks had crossed a line, and Jack felt the weight of every lost battle inside his chest. The teens weren't just careless kids fooling around. This was a deliberate strike, a calculated wound aimed at a man they saw as easy prey. Tyler's bitterness simmered beneath his cocky exterior, born of a household fractured by shouting matches and cold silences. His parents' fights left him hollow, and the bullying gave him a fleeting sense of power, an illusion that he could make someone else feel as powerless as he often did. Jack's fury was not just about the broken hose. It was the insult to his dignity, the erasure of the small victories he'd carved out for himself. The neighborhood's quiet murmurs, the casual glances that ignored the scars, both visible and hidden, everything compounded the sting of isolation. He was invisible in a way far deeper than age or circumstance. The injustice wasn't just the vandalism, it was the silence, the absence of allies in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. When Jack confronted Tyler later that afternoon, his voice steady but edged with a quiet authority, he expected remorse, or at least a flicker of understanding. Instead, the group sneered and jeered, their laughter sharp as shattered glass. Their mocking dismissal was a fresh wound, each jeer driving the veteran's anger deeper, fanning the flames of a fire he had struggled to keep smoldering. They saw him as weak, irrelevant, an obstacle to be mocked, not a man with a past they dared not imagine. But Jack refused to retreat. His anger wasn't blind rage, it was righteous indignation, fueled by years of discipline and survival. It was the kind of anger that promised he would not be broken by this senseless cruelty. The garden hose might have been cut, but his resolve remained intact. He looked at Tyler with eyes hardened by experience, silently promising that this damage would not go unanswered, not with silence, not with inaction. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Jack sat on his porch, hands clenched tightly around a mug of cold coffee. The neighborhood around him hummed with life, oblivious to the storm that churned within the veteran's chest. His gaze drifted over the wilted edges of his rose bushes, the once bright petals now fragile and thirsty, each one a small casualty of that afternoon's assault. Jack's thoughts were a whirlwind of frustration and determination. He had faced enemies on battlefields where survival was never guaranteed. This new enemy, the indifferent cruelty of youth, was unfamiliar but no less real. The wounds were different, but the fight was the same. Somewhere in the shadows of his neighborhood, he knew Tyler and his gang were feeling powerful now, emboldened by their act, but Jack's years had taught him patience and strategy. The storm inside him was gathering, and when it broke, it would be on his terms. This cut hose was more than a broken tool. It was a spark that ignited a fire. Jack Reynolds was done, standing silently in the face of disrespect. The days ahead would test his endurance in ways he hadn't anticipated. But if his garden could grow through harsh seasons, so could he. The battle lines had been drawn, quietly, under the surface, but unmistakably, and Jack was ready to fight back, not just for his garden, but for the respect he deserved, for the peace he had earned. Jack sat on the edge of his porch, shoulders hunched forward as he stared into the parched earth where his roses once drank deeply each morning. The garden, his sanctuary, was fading, petals curling inward, leaves crisping like burnt paper. The soil cracked beneath the sun's relentless gaze, a cruel mirror to the dryness settling deep within Jack's chest. Without the steady pulse of water flowing through that hose, everything he had nurtured began to die, and with it a piece of his soul seemed to shrivel away. This was no ordinary garden, no mere patch of earth tended out of boredom or vanity. It was a testament, a living archive of survival and perseverance. Every thorn and bloom carried the weight of memories, battles fought not with bullets, but with endurance. In the quiet moments after the war, when the world seemed too loud, the garden had been his refuge, the one place where chaos could be tamed. Now it was wilting, and with it the fragile peace he had won. Jack's mind spiraled back to those darkest deployments, to the nights when hope felt like a distant, flickering flame, barely clinging to life. The helplessness he felt now was a brutal echo of the past, when resources ran dry, when enemies seemed insurmountable, when the weight of pain pressed down so heavily it threatened to crush his spirit. That hose wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. It symbolized peace reclaimed after years of conflict, stability forged through struggle, and the dignity of a man who had fought to carve out a place for himself in a world that often seemed indifferent. The garden's withering was a wound that cut deeper than any battlefield injury, for it was personal. It marked a retreat, a surrender to forces Jack neither respected nor understood. Every drooping leaf whispered defeat, a silent testament to the cruelty of apathy and youthful recklessness. The community, once a backdrop to his quiet perseverance, now felt like a crowd turning its back, indifferent to the small tragedies unfolding in its midst. But even as the garden faded, a flicker of hope kindled elsewhere. Sarah Kim moved through the neighborhood with a quiet determination, her firefighter cadet uniform pressed and her eyes sharp with purpose. She had met Jack briefly at community meetings, heard his stories of service, felt the weight behind his silence. To Sarah, Jack was more than just a neighbor. He was a symbol of sacrifice, a living relic of a generation that had given everything and asked for little. Her respect for veterans ran deep, intertwined with a fierce belief that community was a pact, a promise that no one would face hardship alone. When Sarah noticed the garden's decline, when she saw the broken hose lying abandoned like a forgotten lifeline, something inside her snapped. This wasn't just about water or plants. It was about justice. It was about standing up to small acts of cruelty that echoed far beyond the physical damage they caused. Sarah gathered her fellow cadets one evening, sharing Jack's story with a quiet intensity that rallied them. To these young women and men, this was an opportunity, a chance to repay a debt, to fight back not with weapons, but with acts of care and solidarity. Under the cloak of darkness, while the neighborhood slumbered unaware, Sarah and her team moved like shadows, swift and precise. They replaced the severed hose with a length of fire-resistant tubing, engineered to endure heat, pressure, and sabotage. But they didn't stop there. With careful hands and expert minds, they installed a new irrigation system, automated, resilient, designed to keep Jack's garden alive no matter the challenges ahead. Every valve, every drip emitter was a promise. This garden would not die, not on their watch. It was more than a repair. It was a beacon, a quiet defiance against neglect, a testament to the power of community when it chose to act. Sarah understood that what they were doing was symbolic, a small rebellion against a creeping sense of isolation. The garden was a lifeline to Jack's past, but it was also a bridge to the future, one where he could feel seen, supported, and valued again. When morning came, the first light caught the glint of new tubing woven through the flower beds, and Jack's eyes found the gentle pulse of water flowing once more. The roses drank deeply, petals unfurling tentatively as if sensing a renewed chance to bloom. And somewhere beneath the surface of his grief and anger, a fragile flicker of hope stirred, a reminder that even in the darkest seasons, life could be coaxed back from the brink, and no man, no matter how scarred, was truly alone. Jack awoke to the gentle hum of water flowing through his garden, a sound so familiar yet long absent that it startled him into full awareness before his eyes even opened. The morning light seeped through the curtains, illuminating a transformed scene outside his window. The roses, once brittle and retreating from the sun's relentless glare, stood upright, their petals vibrant and poised as if breathing again after a long slumber. The garden hose, the object of so much pain and anger just days before, now lay restored, reinforced with sturdy, fire-resistant tubing that gleamed faintly under the dawn's glow. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The sheer thoughtfulness, the care poured into this unexpected restoration, pressed heavily on his chest, overwhelming him with a tide of emotions: gratitude, disbelief, and a quiet, profound hope. The garden had ceased to be a lonely monument to one man's endurance. It had transformed into a living testament of communal resilience, proof that individual struggle could be met with collective strength. This wasn't just a repaired irrigation system. It was a statement, a defiant act of justice spoken in the language of water, life, and restoration. It told Jack without words that he was seen, that his peace mattered, and that the community would not allow cruelty or neglect to fester unchallenged. Word traveled swiftly through the quiet suburban streets. Neighbors exchanged hushed praises for the firefighter cadets, young, disciplined, and determined, who had taken it upon themselves to shield Jack's sanctuary from further harm. The story spread beyond mere gossip. It grew into a narrative of hope and action, a clear message that standing up for one another could ripple outward in ways no one anticipated. Tyler Brooks, the architect of the garden's sabotage, found himself at the heart of this swelling tide of disapproval. The laughter and bravado he once wielded like a shield against his own inner torment now echoed hollow in the face of the community's united front. His friends began to distance themselves, uneasy with the consequences of their actions as they became more than a reckless prank. The weight of collective judgment settled on Tyler like a relentless fog, penetrating the walls he had built to contain his pain. For the first time, he confronted the shame he had buried beneath layers of defiance, shame intertwined with loneliness and a fractured home life. In the stillness of his own reflection, Tyler wrestled with a gnawing question. What did he truly want from his anger? The community's support for Jack and the cadets' selfless efforts forced a reckoning, breaking through his hardened exterior. The path forward was uncertain, tangled with remorse and the desire for redemption, but it was a path nonetheless, one that could lead to healing rather than destruction. Jack's triumph extended beyond the revival of his garden. It was etched in the very fabric of the neighborhood's renewed spirit. The collective action inspired neighbors to organize regular efforts in support of veterans, small acts that, like droplets in a stream, promised to swell into a river of change. From meal deliveries to shared stories, from quiet visits to neighborhood watches, the community wove itself tighter, stronger, more empathetic. And amidst this resurgence of solidarity, Tyler quietly sought help, stepping toward the light rather than away from it. The garden thrived once more, but it no longer stood simply as a patch of earth tended by one man's hands. It had become a symbol, a beacon of what could be achieved when hope outlasted injustice, when wounds were met not with silence, but with action, and when the better angels of humanity chose to rise together. Each blooming rose was a reminder that even in the face of cruelty and neglect, the seeds of compassion and resilience could take root, grow, and inspire lasting change. Jack's story, once steeped in solitude and pain, had blossomed into a narrative of triumph, shared strength, and an unwavering faith in the capacity for community to heal and uplift.